Word on the street is that retail's in a long-term slump to the point that people are actually running from it. That's absolutely not the case. We believe that there's a lot of potential and long-term growth opportunities in the retail industry across the U.S. What industry sectors should you target? What's driving those industry sectors? How fast are they currently moving? And why in the world hasn't construction volume followed? Those are questions that we're going to dig in today's episode. Welcome to the PioneerCast. I'm Dwayne Abels, founder and president of Pioneer IQ. I hope over the course of the next 8 to 10 minutes, you're able to pick up a couple of critical insights that'll help you to develop your leaders, build your business, and help build some confidence into your markets to help better forecast them. We're in the middle of an episode that we're calling 2021, the year of transition. Simply put, we've all been through the disruptions of 2020 that have now seeped into 21. And what we've started to discover over the last 6 to 8 months is this significant macro trend in nearly every industry sector where owners are now having to go back, reassess how their clients and their markets are shifting and changing, realign their business plan, then redeploy in order to get their business back on track. The year of transition. We believe that it's critical for design and construction executives to understand how these transitions are affecting their markets and their clients so that they can be in a better place to more holistically serve these clients and even unroot some of the competitors who've been entrenched for a long time. In order to help us understand what's going on in retail, I'm bringing in an old business partner, not in age, but in tenure, Keith Rather.
Thanks. I appreciate you for qualifying that.
Absolutely. Keith, thanks for joining us. I know you and I get these questions all the time, but out of all the industry sectors that we talk about, people seem to be the most down on retail. And I think it's partly because it's just maybe rumor oriented and it's what we're hearing in the news, but it certainly contradicts a lot of what you and I have been talking about, and it contradicts a lot of what the data is going to show us. So I'm really excited today for you to jump in and help us understand what we really need to know about this industry and what's driving it. Thanks for being with us.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here. Dwayne, one of the things, and I know that you care about people, you care about people's hearts. And one of the things that's happened to executives in the retail sector is that, over the last year, they've just been shell-shocked. They went from crisis stages where they really were worried about whether they're going to be able to survive or not. And now we're at a point where retail activity, the consumer's really starting to emerge, and recovery is well beyond starting. I mean, we're well into the growth phase of this recovery period. But the scars on executives' minds from what happened to them during the pandemic has them a little bit in a stance where they're just on hold, they're paused. What's interesting is as you and I talk to executives around the country, we kind of hear this when you ask them whether they're confident, they say they're confident to us, right? They look us in the eye and they say, oh yeah, things are great. Yeah. But then when it comes to putting their money where their mouth is and actually investing in a new project or literally going in with expansion, there's still something kind of pulling them back. They're on hold, yeah. Right? They just can't release that yet. But let's look at the first chart here that we've got. When you look at growth rates, they're actually phenomenal. So as you said in the opening, total retail, that line number one, if you look, we're 51% higher than we were last year, but we're 21%, as you said, higher than we were at the same time in 2019. You can go down that list, and year over year, it's just not even worth talking about where we were during the pandemic phases. Some of those numbers are just unbelievable. But even against 2019, which is a much better comparison, we're up double digits in almost every single sector. Gasoline stations, a lot of that's the price of fuel, so that has an impact. But clothing and clothing accessory stores, which have been dead for a year, apparel's been in real trouble. No one's been buying clothing. Now, growing at a rate of about 5% faster than it was pre-pandemic. So, we're emerging out of our cocoons and we're coming back. We're spending. It's just not equal spending yet, and we haven't completely fully reopened the economy. But generally the consumer is very, very strong, and there's this transition we're going through right now between pre-pandemic and post-pandemic spending. Last thing I'll have on this chart I just want to point out is if you look at line 14, look at bars and restaurants. Any kind of retail where we seem to congregate, we get into tight quarters, really starting to emerge. On a month-over-month basis, it was one of the few that was really up, and it was the strongest month-over-month increase of any industry we saw. So up 3% month-over-month. And then even versus 2019, and we still feel like there's a lot of restrictions around the country, but the whole sector was up 2% versus where it was in 2019. So the consumer wants to get out, they want to spend, they want to congregate, they want to, put their feet to the street and spend money.
Yeah, it's a great point. We might want to just reiterate a couple of points that we made last week to the SMACNA group that we spoke to up in Western Washington. And you made a really fantastic point to them. And your point at the time was these industry sectors where we congregate, mainly in retail and restaurants, bars, etc., those are areas where mechanical contractors, electrical contractors, plumbing contractors, specialty trade guys, they're going to have a substantial amount of need as they start to turn their lights back on and get their operations back up and running. We've heard this in the airline industry. We've heard in retail. So if a viewer is in that MEP, mechanical, sheet metal space, your time is now for owners to significantly need what you're doing to get their lights turned back on and fully functional. Keith, if I'm being honest, when you and I went through some of this data over the last week or so, when you first showed this chart, I literally, and you do a great job of this documenting it, but I literally had to go back and make sure it was a government source because some of these numbers are just astronomical. 726% growth rates, 155% growth rates. I mean, some of these numbers are just crazy. And then you realize, okay, well, 2020 was a really slow to dead year. But then to compare it over 2019 when things were normal and still have a 40 to 41% growth rate, 14, 22, 36. I mean, these are some crazy numbers.
Yeah, and the one thing it does point out, Dwayne, too, when we think about construction is look at department stores down there, which are primarily going to be shopping malls. When we look at it versus 2019, you really can see the long-term sort of death of the industry, if you will. Even though people are putting their feet to the street and they like to get back in malls, and just the shopping mall thing is just not coming back. But every other sector, as you said, is booming. So let's take a look at the next slide real quick. And one of the areas that we continue to talk about, we want to throw it out here because this is a big retail trend and will impact construction, is the whole e-commerce phenomenon. So we saw people increase spending on e-commerce during the pandemic, and that's supposed to continue well beyond. So we're going to grow about 23% in 2021 globally, about 20% per year through the year 2027. We've got to add 330 million additional square feet of e-commerce warehouse and just fulfillment space by 2025 just to meet these growth rates and this demand. They're going to eat up 27% of all industrial real estate through 2025. And the big thing that you and I keep talking about is that the way we fulfill e-commerce is changing. And so, we think about e-commerce fulfillment as just being these big, huge warehouses, and part of it is, but there's also this notion of, they call it BOPIS, right? Buy online, pick up in the store. There's a lot of people that are now purchasing products and they go to the store, use their feet, pick it up in the brick and mortar area. And so those stores have got to change their physical space. So the rehabs and the refurbishing and remodeling of a lot of retail spaces are going to continue as companies try to adjust to sort of this new way of consumer spending.
Over the last couple of days, I've been down in the DFW area and have been able to talk to a lot of contractors, architects, developers. And I was frankly kind of testing some of the things that we're seeing from a data perspective. It was very interesting feedback. Quite frankly, when I told them what we are starting to see and what we're forecasting, some of these numbers here are 23% growth over time and then 330 million square feet. Frankly, their jaw dropped. And as we started talking it through, they were starting to calculate, what they've been seeing, what they've gotten backlog, what they're hearing from some of their clients. And by the end of the conversation, like, yeah, that's probably really on track with what we're seeing. Thought it was also interesting, a couple of tidbits, especially around the intersections of I-10 and I-35, or I-35 where it merges up in North Dallas. Some of these areas that you've been talking about with transportation logistic hubs, again, just total proof. A lot of things that are happening that are continuing to push this forward and into reality. So it's been fun to test that quite a bit.
Yeah, so just 2 quick points on that. So anywhere where we see major population growth areas, and so the DFW area is definitely one of those, e-commerce demand just surges and actually outpaces capacity. So you've got a tremendous amount of warehousing and fulfillment space, construction going up. But here's the kicker, and the thing that you and I have met with a number of construction firms, and we hear from all of them, is that if you go try to buy certain types of steel trusses and stuff for those warehouses, you've got 6 to 8 month waiting periods just to get those supplies. So how does an e-commerce company handle this additional demand right away? Because I want my stuff and I want it today, right? I'm not going to wait 6 to 8 months for you to get a truss to build a warehouse for me to go get my stuff. As a consumer, I want it now, right? And so what they're doing is this in-store fulfillment and being able to fulfill from inside a retail brick and mortar store. Those are the things that are going to help drive sort of this transition period. So,
right. Absolutely.
Let's go to the next slide. Let's take a look at what we're looking at moving forward. As we've said before, there's a lot of different ways we could slice and dice the retail outlook. National Retail Federation has it growing, somewhere between 6 and 7%. E-commerce is up around 20%. So you got these strong growth rates. But what I like to do is I like to look and see what the buyers are doing, because the buyers are putting their careers on the line and putting their neck out there by buying inventory and loading up on inventories. And so they're looking ahead 6 to 12 months, and what they see is this tremendous demand. We see a record number of imports of containers into the United States, and this is from the National Retail Federation. And you can look and see that we're going to average somewhere around 2 million TEUs a month, stretching out through basically the end of the year once this forecast is complete. And so there is just a tremendous amount of optimism in the whole retail sector about what's coming, and they're bulking up to get ready for it. So if you're a retail executive and you're looking for that confidence that now's the time to go in and start thinking long term and shift your thinking, from near-term crisis management to long-term strategic planning, adding capacity, adding square footage, adding new facilities, expanding my retail store brick and mortar fronts. You're making that transition and thinking now because of what you see looking forward. So then a couple of things too, you and I have heard, just it's across construction, it's across every sector, but companies could be growing faster. They need more capacity, but they don't have the workers to do it. So one of the things that will be another key driver of new construction demand is when retailers are fully staffed and they feel like they have confidence if they go open a new store, they can find workers to fill it. So in July, we're supposed to get about 4 million workers coming back into the workforce that are currently sitting on the sidelines, if you will. In September, we're going to get another 8 to 12 million that come back in after kids go back to school and parents decide that, hey, everything's back to normal, time for me to get back in the workforce. So we know that that's going to be that next wave that creates the next sort of phase of new construction demand. So then the last little slide we have here is basically our conclusion. And for those of you who have seen our prior podcast, that we use this, it's kind of like a speedometer gauge to try and help understand where these industries are going. And so the color just denotes sort of where they are today. Is it hot, green? Is it sort of lukewarm and stable but not growing? It's yellow. And then of course, if it's a contracting sector, it's red. And then the gauge itself just says how fast it's expanding or contracting. So mixed use, so commercial, retail, a little bit of residential sort of blended together. Still going to be very hot. Just depends on the geography. Even though we saw some suburbanization trends, still a lot of people trying to get into these mixed use suburban type environments where they still feel like they have a little tight knit community there. So still going to be very strong. Strip mall shopping, still just not coming off a dead center. We just see kind of some overbuilding, but kind of lukewarm. Traditional malls still dead. Don't see anything helping that rebound. But there is some destination demand coming that sort of blends entertainment with retail. And so you're starting to see some interesting things there. And we could see traditional malls make a little more of that transition, maybe back into something like that, where they're blending big convention centers and things that you might take kids to do, sporting events, dance recitals or dance competitions, those kinds of things. And you blend retail and those destination type of events in an old traditional mall. And so you may see some conversions like that. Last two things, airport retail, only lukewarm because a lot of the airports are still in that transition phase. They're still trying to get to the point where they're convinced COVID is in the rearview mirror, and that people are still going to continue to do leisure travel, and the business travel will pick up, and then that'll take off. No pun intended, right? And then e-commerce, of course, very hot, and will continue to be so.
It is so nice to see these dials starting to change. Quite honestly, I didn't expect to see as much color as we're seeing now. It is really nice to see a lot of these sectors green, and even more importantly, like you just noted, the pace of those industries that are just really heating up. You've noted a few times, and I just want to explore this a little bit with you. You've noted that there is a vast impact based on where you live or where you're working or where you're targeting. So help us understand how geography plays into some of these industry sectors that have a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, there are areas of the country where obviously from a weather perspective or from a job opportunity perspective are very attractive. We know that there has been an influx into the southern regions of the country. So not just Texas, but I mean, it is across the Southeast. It's in the deep South around Texas, but then we also see it in the warm desert climates around Arizona, Nevada, places like that. So you do see some migration happening. And now with work from home, even though the hybrid model that a lot of companies are going to says that you still have to be in the office a couple of days a week, but the rest of the week you can kind of work from home. That has slowed down a little bit of the migration, but there are still people relocating all over the country, especially if you're an engineer or one of those, whether you have one of those occupations that are in high demand, but you can do it from anywhere. Those folks are relocating to places where either warm weather attracts them or, just less congestion, cheaper standard of living, less taxes. There's a lot of different drivers that kind of push people into these geographies. But just in general, when you and I have looked at growth rates, it's almost like you could draw a line, the Mason-Dixon line across the country, and it just feels like almost anything south of that seems to have some strong growth. But we are starting to see some people kind of flock back in a little bit into the Northeast and seeing some suburbanization trends there. So it's a little bit, it's all over the place.
You've also mentioned a few times here in the last quarter or two how industry sectors are deeply impacted by how quickly they're opening back up. And so we've done a lot of work and studies in Texas and in the South, as you just reiterated, but it does seem to be very true that the quicker that these areas are opening up, the faster specifically these retail sectors are jumping back online. Is that still true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes perfect sense. People have been cooped up over the last year. And even though there's a percentage of the population that is still very afraid of COVID or, for a number of reasons, or maybe they haven't been able to get vaccinated and they are concerned about going out, most people in the country just have cabin fever, man. They just want to go. And whether they're spending a ton of money or whether they're just out browsing and they just want to get out, that phenomenon is happening all over the country. So we're seeing foot traffic everywhere really, really start to pick up. And again, that's one of the reasons why the destination stuff is so popular. It's, people want an experience. They want to go out and do the experiential thing. And so whether it's vacation travel, tourism, or just, day trips, it just seems like that's still a big trend taking place in the country right now, especially over the summer months. We'll see what happens when back to school happens, but we still think that the people just want to go and they just want to get out.
So we like to always end the podcast with giving you some direction on how to use this information. Hopefully you're able to see some of the data that's given us a lot of confidence on the long-term potential and growth in the industry sector, our recommendation would be for you to deploy your existing and your emerging leaders out into the marketplace and have them stay in front of your customers and your prospects and compare the feedback that they're getting within different markets. And the whole objective there would be for your leaders to jump out and understand what shifts your clients or prospects are seeing in their specific market and in their certain geographies and communities. Understand how that's specifically going to change and affect their business plan or business model. And then thirdly, try to articulate or understand from that interview how that's going to affect their facilities. Now more so than ever, and Keith just walked us through a lot of data to prove this, industries are in massive transition. It's an opportunity for you and your team to jump in, pick up, and potentially start to help a new potential client in ways that you've never been able to help them before, and even more holistically. Keith, I sure appreciate your help today. You've brought some clarity and some data to an industry that I think is really misinterpreted right now. And hopefully it gives some of our clients and viewers a little bit more confidence to stay the course in some of these areas, and most importantly, to jump out and do some interviews with their clients and prospects to hear it firsthand. So I greatly appreciate your help.
Always enjoy being here.
More so than ever, the market and your employees need you. Have courage, lead on.